Welcome to Bloom Today. We have a tough show today. We're going to be asking, is suicide contagious? We talk about internal and external brokenness and how you can heal
so that you can use the fertilizer of your past to bloom today. So welcome everybody. Today we are going to address one of those really tough subjects and series of subjects, discussing suicide, but we're not going to tell this story from a place of discouragement or darkness. We're going to tell the story from a place of life and hope, right, Jenny?
Yes, and wholeness and healing.
Yes.
Because it is available, and it's always available to us, because God's love is that healing place, and that is always available to us.
Super grateful for that.
Yes, absolutely.
But I really do know the darkness. For me and my story, I talk about rock bottom being laced with razor blades.
Yes. Because
the pain and the blackness and the just incredible heavy darkness that came in that space, I experienced it at that level 2 different times in trauma situations, and things just hit a point where I had nothing left. And I am super, super grateful that I'm still here.
Me too.
Actually, the first time was I told you about I wanted to have suicide by a grizzly bear.
Yes.
Because I remember that, yes. Because I was too scared to do anything and I didn't know how to do it, but I wanted it over. And I'm not trying to be funny about that. It sounds funny, but in my case, it actually wasn't funny. I lived up in Canada, and I had hit such a hopeless point. There was this area where grizzly bears were coming after trash and stuff, and they were sighted on a regular basis. And it was out in the middle of nowhere, and I went walking there because I was done.
Right.
And I didn't know how to do anything else, but I was like, I am completely finished, and I wanted a grizzly bear to kill me and to eat me. Like that sounds horrifying to think about it now, but in that space, it was actually felt like then it'll be over and I won't have to deal with this anymore. And I wasn't scared of it. I was just like walking there. I'm like done. Super grateful that God met me in that space, and I stopped. I'd gone like 3/4 of the way there, and I stopped, and I realized that I wasn't ready to completely end it yet. Like I wanted to, but I was like, I can't, because then I'm going to be setting up a who knows what kind of series of events for other people. I don't know where this is going to land me in eternity. I didn't know, like I just didn't have answers. I just hurt so bad.
Right.
And that hopeless place is something that God can meet us in, and he can meet those around us in if we aren't brought out of that.
Right. And you hear that a lot from people who've attempted suicide, that what they want is just for the pain to end.
Yes.
And they can't see beyond that. And I know the enemy, when he comes in, he just takes our perspective of the world and he just shrinks it really low. So it seems like this is it, like the moment that we're in, that's it. Or it will always be this way, and it will only get worse. And we can't see that hope. And that's such a heartbreaking place for anyone to be. But when the enemy takes out all of that hope and takes the God-sized perspective out of it, it's just, it's so heartbreaking. It's so sad. And it's not just one person that it affects. It's the ripple effects that happen. And I myself have never really considered suicide. I have prayed, God, can you just make this all stop? Like, I'm ready for heaven. I pray that a lot.
To live as Christ, to die as gain. The scripture of actually get that one.
Yes, please. And the pain, I mean, we're all human. We all live in this broken world, and we're all, experiencing pain one way or another. And my 10 is my 10. And so there's a lot of ideas about, comparison, or, what must a person be thinking, or, you know, that they're so selfish in that moment. And really they're just, I mean, they're so hurting in that place.
Right. And it's not, at least for me in that place, there was honestly, the primary thought was not about anybody else. Like, I think God woke me up with the,
right, but
you don't want to cause this effect. But that was a gift of his to me that I was able to like see for a second. Right. But it was the idea that I was in a black hole so deep. There was nobody else.
Right.
There were no other people. I wasn't thinking about how it would affect my parents or how it would affect my siblings or how it would affect anybody else. And in the 2 other times that I reached that point, I had children. I had like there's so many people in that space, but when you're in that darkness and it's so isolating, mm-hmm. It isn't a thought of how that affects right. everybody else. And everyone likes the idea of an out. Like, you go to sleep, things, you know, go black and quiet. Why can't it just stay there? Like, why can't I just be out? And when we're having to deal with that personally, or we're dealing with the ripple effects of it, it's a place where it can feel like it's contagious. Yeah. Well, if they're out and they don't have to deal with it anymore, I'm hurting because they're gone. I shouldn't have to deal with it anymore either. And that, for some people and in some families, has been a cycle that has picked up and seemed like it was actually contagious. Right.
And we talk about the heritage, right? Mm-hmm. The heritage of suicide and how that can affect, in your family. And if you're opening that door, or a family member opens that door who is above you in your line, that can be something that is passed down spiritually, because the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his goal. Yeah. And we can pretend like this spiritual realm doesn't exist, or it's not something that really affects me. It's very real, mm-hmm. and it definitely affects us. And it is something that we have the opportunity to fight with God, mm-hmm. And with the Holy Spirit, that is more powerful than anything the enemy can throw at us.
Absolutely. And a lot of times there's factors that people don't take into consideration, whether it's mental illness due to a right. hormonal or chemical imbalance.
Right.
There can be medications that people end up on that the side effect is suicidal ideation and can lead yes. toward that. There are sometimes trauma factors that somebody has not gotten help for,
right.
that can lead to it. And we did a previous show about where a mother who was in her 80s had childhood trauma she had not dealt with, and it eventually hit a point where it was overload. But it is, I don't know that anybody is just immune, because I think you set up the right set of circumstances for anybody, and that can seem like a valid option regardless. Right. So I know I, for one, have zero judgment or question, though I know some people want to place judgment on anybody. Mm-hmm. But I know what it feels like on the inside, and please don't judge. You have no idea what somebody else is walking through. You have no idea what pushed what button to cause what choice. And so I want to be clear about that, because that is adding damage to damage that's already done. Mm-hmm. And my heart just breaks when that happens.
And there's no shame in asking for help, and there's no shame in even processing from if a friend or loved one has committed suicide. There's no shame in feeling all of those feelings of grief. Then anger is part of that, and in addition to the depression and the bargaining and all of that. And so instead of bottling it up, getting through it, and sometimes it's the I shouldn't, or I can't believe I'm, and how could I, and all of that stuff that the enemy just wants to throw at us. And there's just so much healing in letting go of that and letting God just come in and really help us through and navigate that. And as well as asking for help. We don't all have to do it on our own. We weren't built to do all of this on our own. We weren't built to go through the brokenness and the challenges and the struggle mm-hmm. on our own.
No, and the truth is, where it may feel like, oh, they would be disappointed in me if they knew that this is what I was thinking, or they would be embarrassed of me, or they would judge me for having these thoughts or feeling these ways. When the truth is, especially when people find out when it's too late, they would love to have given help and they didn't know, they didn't have an opportunity. So I am super excited that we're going to get to change that narrative and tell a story where there's the brokenness and hope.
Yes, and I love when we get to talk about the hope. And I'm so excited about our guest, Jill Neely. She is such an amazing woman, a tough woman. We said this was a tough show. Well,
tough topic and a tough woman.
Yes,
so proud of her.
Absolutely. So proud. Writer, speaker, an amazing encourager with just an inspirational story. And I can't wait to share it with you. Welcome, Jill. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you.
You have such an amazing story, and you have been through so much in this world. It's just incredible to me. For you to be sitting here is just a testimony of your strength and the strength of God that works through you.
Thank you.
It's just amazing.
And I was excited about this episode because you have such an energy of life. Every time I've seen you, even when I've seen you in heartbreak, you have still, because we all go through our snotty-nosed, full out pain and grieving and processing. But even in that space, you had so much life just vibrating out of you. And I don't know if you get told that, but I was telling Jenny that earlier. That was just the feeling that I have about you is just life that's bigger than.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to tell you that here. Let you know that's how I see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I had that life just because, God is my life, and he has shown himself faithful and just his goodness throughout my journey. And I know this is my story, but I really don't refer to it as my story because I look at our stories are still being written, and our best chapters are not even written yet. And I believe that fully. But our journeys, on the other hand, tend to be those things that happen in our life that are outside of our control and things that we don't necessarily get to pick and choose or have any say over. Mm-hmm. And so let me preface it a little bit. So with my personal journey, I grew up in Nashville and lived here my whole life. Mm-hmm. I, like many others, had a little bit of a challenging upbringing. So not to really touch on that too much, but I also had a lot of shame and abuse and rejection that I had to overcome. Even my high school years, were pretty much a blur. I ended up addicted to crack cocaine and on the streets at 17 years old. Then in June of 2007, I didn't grow up in church, but therefore I didn't know who to turn to for help when I needed it most. So like most others, I fell into drugs and alcohol. And then in June of 2007 is when I walked into the National Rescue Mission. And that is where I met the Lord. That's where I got saved. And he began his transforming work in my life. And I just was so eager and so hungry. I felt his love. I felt his presence from day one. He just opened up my eyes and gave me insight. And I remember for the first few years just crawling up in bed and just engulfed in his word and just learning. I just couldn't get enough. And so that really helped to lay that foundation of my journey and my walk. And I became a leader in my church and started pouring into other women and mentoring them. And I lead a ladies group on Monday nights, and I just adore them. Also been on several mission trips, so I enjoy foreign soil and the rewards from all of that. And I faced a lot of trials and storms in my life, even since walking with the Lord. And I watched my dad pass away of cancer, and my mom's house burned down, and I was in a rollover wreck, and on the way to take somebody to dinner one night in my ladies group. So, I kind of feel like the enemy's always had it out for, my voice and my life, and I knew that God had a plan on it ever since I got saved. And then the biggest storm of my life happened 10 years into walking with the Lord.
So there was more storm, because you very quickly said a bunch of, oh, it was hard and it was whatever. And we know you well enough to know, by the way, that was the glossy version. The 10 is a 10 is a 10.
Mm-hmm.
Your 10 is a pretty dramatic, difficult, just heart-wrenching pain point, difficulty, and all the series of it. So for our audience, because some people who are really, really broken, they may see that, oh, you look so alive and so beautiful, and could it have really been that bad? And I just want to say it really was that bad.
Yeah.
And that was still all not the hardest point.
Right.
And so just to give a scale of, you thought you had hit a 10 a whole lot of times sooner.
I thought I had a testimony.
You thought you had a testimony over and over again, and then you found out that the hardest part that you've ever dealt with was yet to come. And I'm just so humbled that you would come and share.
Thank you.
This next hardest part.
Yeah, this next hardest part is that that part that you never really think you would have to share. And I have a beautiful 15-year-old daughter who is in heaven right now, and it is that part of the story that I never in a million years thought I would ever have to share. It is every mom's worst fear and every mom's worst nightmare, except for that night it became my reality. And I remember I was leaving on, I was actually encouraging another friend, and I'd stopped at Walmart to pick up some groceries. And when I got back out to my car, I was putting them in my trunk, and I looked down at my phone, and I had 5 missed calls. And they were from her dad. My daughter was on vacation and for that week. And I knew that with 5 missed calls, there was something definitely wrong.
Right, that's not good news.
And so I got in my car and called her dad, and I could tell immediately in his voice that there was something really wrong. And he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Yes, I'm driving." He said, "I need you to pull over." And I said, okay. And I was actually just leaving Walmart parking lot. And so I pulled over into one of the last little stalls. And he proceeded to tell me that our only daughter, my only child, had taken her life. And when he first told me that, I literally screamed so loud that I'm sure other continents even heard me. Like, I was screamed for a good 10 minutes. And I remember banging on the steering wheel, and I was like, no, this didn't happen. This didn't happen. And so I don't believe you. I was just in complete shock. And, it's that call that you never think that you're going to get. And he said, "I've got to get off the phone. The coroner's here." And he said, "Call your pastor." And so I hung up the phone, and I called my pastors, and I have an amazing church family, and they came and stayed with me that night. And the next few days, weeks, even months were a blur. I mean, I was in such a state of shock. I couldn't tell you who came and when or any of that. All I know is that all of a sudden everything I knew was gone. What do you do when you've been a mom for 15 years and all of a sudden that's taken away? Grief is, I thought I knew what grief was. My dad had passed and, other family members, but nothing compares to the pain of losing your only child to suicide. And then, of course, the stigma that surrounds suicide. She wasn't depressed. She wasn't on any medicine. She never even attempted it before. It was completely out of the blue. We had no signs whatsoever.
Right, and there's no way to necessarily even know what led to what if you don't have anything.
No.
And so there's no...
And that's not uncommon necessarily for there to be no outward signs that anyone can see. And there is that... and what I assume you're referring to with the stigma is that, well, why didn't you do something?
Right.
What did you miss?
Well, you must have been a bad mom if your child made that choice. And that's
what could you have done differently?
That's so not necessarily a factor at all.
Absolutely.
So what did you do?
Well, I like to think, it kind of feels like now looking back for the next couple of years, I did nothing but eat, sleep, and cry for a couple of years. Like it was, I did not even have the strength to even get out of bed. Like I could not, I stayed for weeks and just crying out in my midnight hour. And I remember crawling across my floor into my baby girl's room and knowing that she was never going to sit in there, you know, to look at her door and know that it's never going to open again. And I actually have her stuffed bear sitting at my kitchen table because I can't stand to see it empty, you know, and, it was so hard that I had lost all hope. I had lost all, you know, and grief is kind of one of those things. It makes you feel so unstable, because even when I did get seasons where I felt like I was doing somewhat okay, I would go into the store and I would hear a little child in the next aisle say, "Mama." You know, and I would just completely break down, you know, and it's just those little things, those waves come out of nowhere. Yeah. And, you know, eventually I learned, I've always been a go-getter. Mm-hmm. So there's just God's placed this tenacity and perseverance within me where I just refuse to give up. And
that's why we said tough.
Yeah. So I did grief counseling. I did like equine therapy. I did grief share, pastoral, you know, counseling, just all these different things. Anything that I thought that would help me to learn, heal, and grow, you know, I did. And when I signed up to serve the Lord, it didn't come with any stipulations. And for me, that included losing my daughter. And I remember one time in particular, I was at one of my lowest points, and it was around Mother's Day. And I just was crying for days on end. I remember driving in and just having to pull over on the side of the road because I was crying so hard I couldn't see on the interstate. Right. You know, and finally I went to a women's retreat, and that when I came back, I went to a church service, and Gentess Franklin was a special speaker there. And I heard a sermon that night that was one that I would hold on to for a long time. And he was preaching on this parable of the 10 lepers and how there were 10 lepers that came to Jesus and Jesus healed them all. But only one of them praised God. Yeah, only one praised God. And that one, Jesus said, was the only one he made him whole. Mm-hmm. So although they all got healed, only one of them was made whole. And so for me, I just rested in that. It was one of those where it just, I don't know if you've heard a word, and it just settles it. God has settled it in my heart that I was going to be whole again. And I was like, how am I ever going to be whole when, you know, my daughter is gone? But come to find out, I'm no less than, because my daughter, you know, is already in heaven. I'm still a mom. I'll always be a mom. Yes. You know, and I
have 2 babies in heaven with her.
You?
So not the same story, but yes, 2 babies up there.
Well, on that praise note, you know, I have this saying where when you don't know what else to do, just praise your way through. Mm-hmm. And I was in another church service one time where I was so weak, I couldn't praise. I had no joy. I had no, you know, hope. It was just the depression and grief. They just kind of all intertwined sometimes. And I was, the praise song or the worship song came on, and I couldn't lift my hands. And I have a best friend named Michelle, and she was sitting with me in service, and she grabbed my hand and she held it up underneath through the whole worship song. And so when I couldn't praise the Lord, she did it for me. And it just reminded me of the story when Moses Israelites were fighting the Amalekites, and her and Aaron were holding up their arms. And so I knew at that point, even when I couldn't walk on my own, even when I didn't have the strength, God would completely send somebody to be my strength and to praise for me.
That is so amazing. It is, because we can get so focused in on what we've lost and what's broken and what's missing and what has been devastated. And in your case, you had plenty in your own story before you were having to walk through this about your daughter, and to see that even in that space, God met you, even in that place where when we have nothing left, he can meet us. And the grieving side, the enemy can use that to then go, what's the point of living? What do you have left? Why are you? And if you had bought into that, if you had run with that in your pain, then we wouldn't have you here sharing hope and life with other people. But instead, you did the opposite. You reached out for help, and you reached out for help, and you reached out for help. And we talk about that all the time because we've had to reach out for a lot of help.
Yes,
And I still do. Aw. Let me help too.
Sometimes I lend a hand, and sometimes I just it's like reaching further, you know.
Get an extra foot or two in there.
Yes, whatever it takes, you know, whatever it takes, because it can feel like it's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, when you need it the most, it's the last thing you want to do. And so I think is reach out. And I think it's just amazing that, you know, God has had people continuously come to you and help you. And I'm sure that's something that you've prayed for as well. And he is faithful to answer those prayers and to bring those people who are holding up your arms, literally and figuratively. Yeah.
I had gotten to the point where I stopped, you know, questioning God, because, you know, we all question God at times, and, you know, he didn't call us to question him. He just calls us to trust him. So
that's good.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Living
it out is super hard.
There's so many things that are religious theory that people throw out there, and you should be okay because of whatever the thing is. And the fact is, no. Yeah. That doesn't make everything okay.
That's true.
But the real relationship, and not just yours, but the people around you, and the hope that you have, and you're going to get to see Allie again. That's the thing. I love your necklace where you have the.
Actually, this a lady in my ladies group gave it to me at Allie's funeral, and I have not taken it off since. So
that is amazing.
I've had it on. We're coming up on 3 years. So.
Right, and so I've watched you celebrate her life rather than it being about her death. It has been focused consistently on her life, and she's a beautiful girl. I'm really sad
gorgeous.
I didn't get to meet her, but she is beautiful.
She is.
So I'm excited about the fact that there's hope.
Always.
And that comes out of your pores. Like, that life and hope is tangible when I'm around you. It really impressed. Keep saying that.
Yeah.
That wholeness becomes not just, you know, one piece of us, but it's spirit, soul, and body. Mm-hmm. You know, that with the lepers that you were talking about, they were physically healed.
Right.
But when you're going back and you're thanking God and you're worshiping him and you're reaching out to him, what he does is he is in all of those places, spirit, soul, and body, healing us, and as one making us whole.
Yes.
And it's just a beautiful illustration of what God can do, even though this is, you know, such a broken world.
It does.
But you are so beautiful, and I'm so thankful that you're here and sharing all of this. And I know that there's so many people out there who are going to be able to finally, for the first time, recognize hope. So thank you so much for sharing with us, sharing the fertilizer of your past.
My pleasure.
So that we can all
bloom
Today.